The drums had barely quieted after the wedding when Zawadi felt it. That first cold glance from Mama Asha, the way her eyes traveled over Zawadi's hands as if judging how much dust they could hold. The way the aunties whispered when she passed, not even pretending to smile. Tendo held her hand tightly through the rituals, his grip firm, his voice warm, but even his strength couldn't shield her from the chill settling in the corners of her new home. She had dreamed of marriage as a union of hearts, of mornings spent cooking together, of laughter shared beneath mango trees. But instead, Zawadi found herself tiptoeing through her days. Every gesture of kindness seemed to offend. When she rose early to sweep the compound, Mama Asha said she was trying too hard. When she stayed in bed until sunrise, the sisters-in-law said she was lazy. There was no winning ground, only shifting sand beneath her feet. She came from a simple family, yes, but they had taught her dignity. She knew how to bend without breaking. So she tried again and again, offering help in the kitchen, fetching water, remembering everyone's favorite dishes. But it only earned her more silence. One evening, after preparing coconut rice and roasted plantain just the way Tendo liked it, his brother asked aloud if she was seasoning food or casting spells. Everyone laughed except Zawadi. She excused herself to wash the dishes and stayed outside long after the moon had risen. Tendo noticed, of course. He would find her sitting under the neem tree, her fingers twisted together in her lap, eyes on the ground. "Give them time," he whispered once, kneeling beside her. "They'll see your heart the way I did." Zawadi didn't argue. But she wondered, quietly, how long it would take for a heart to be seen through walls made of pride. When the village women gathered to weave mats for an upcoming wedding, Zawadi offered to bring tea and firewood. She came back to find her spot already taken. One of the cousins shrugged and said, "Your seat was never really here, was it?" Zawadi simply set the tea down and sat on a stone nearby, humming softly to herself. She would not give them the satisfaction of breaking her song. Each day she folded her pain into the pleats of her wrapper, into the quiet way she poured water for elders and swept behind the cooking hut. Her smile became thinner but never disappeared. She kept telling herself that goodness, if consistent, would eventually soften even the hardest hearts. But the home stayed cold. Mama Asha rarely addressed her directly. If she needed something done, she would send someone else. If Zawadi answered, she was often met with a long sigh, as though her voice polluted the air. The other daughters-in-law, both from nearby clans, whispered constantly. They wore their pride like crowns, and Zawadi, in her humility, was treated like the girl who stumbled in uninvited to a royal hall. One night, she overheard Mama Asha talking through the thin reed wall. "She bewitched him, I tell you. There's no other reason Tendo would marry a girl with no strong bloodline. Not even a cow to her name." Zawadi curled her knees to her chest on the mat and waited until the quiet came back. Later that week, during evening prayer, she brought the water for washing hands. Mama Asha took it, looked into the bowl and said coldly, "You think you can cleanse yourself into belonging?" Zawadi didn't reply. She bowed slightly and stepped back. She began to pray at dawn alone. Under the mango tree, before the birds fully woke, she whispered her truths into the morning air. She asked for peace, for patience, for strength to keep giving without losing herself completely. She never asked for revenge. Only understanding. Even when Tendo kissed her goodnight and said, "I'm proud of you," she felt the words float away like smoke. Pride was not what she needed. She needed presence. A shield. A voice loud enough to stand between her and their sharpened words. One afternoon, after a long day helping in the field, she sat alone and watched 3 women laugh as they snapped beans. One of them mimicked her voice and the others burst into laughter. Zawadi smiled faintly and continued braiding the palm fronds in her lap. She'd grown used to being the uninvited echo. She remembered something her mother once told her as a child. "Don't let the world make you smaller than your kindness. You were made to be large in love." A heart can be full of love, yet still be too small to house hate from others. Zawadi first heard the word bewitched from the mouth of the old woman who sold cassava by the well. She hadn't meant to overhear it. She was simply waiting in line, her basket light with just a few onions and dry okra, when the woman whispered to her friend, "Mama Asha says the girl used herbs on Tendo. That's why he left his clan's bride waiting. No man with clear eyes chooses a girl with no name." The other woman gasped and glanced at Zawadi, but neither apologized. They just lowered their voices and turned their backs. Zawadi stood there, the sun suddenly heavy on her skin. When she returned home that afternoon, Mama Asha was shelling beans on the veranda. She didn't look up. "Did you bring shame with you too, or just onions?" Zawadi didn't answer. She set the basket down and went to the kitchen. That night, she was served last at the table, even after the young cousin visiting from the next village. The ugali was cold. The greens had only oil left. Tendo didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did but pretended not to. Later, in their hut, she folded his shirt with care and asked softly, "Do they think I made you choose me? That I forced you?" Tendo looked up from his stool. "They don't understand our love. That's all. Just give it time." Zawadi looked at him, long and quiet. "Time?" she asked. "Or silence?" He stood and kissed her forehead. "Let them adjust." But adjusting felt like erosion. Each day, a new piece of her spirit chipped away. Her name was no longer called when food was shared. When guests came, she was asked to stay in the back. Her mats were never displayed. Her opinions were never sought. Mama Asha grew louder. "He no longer visits me the way he used to," she said in front of others. "Ever since that girl came, even the goats feel uneasy. She stares too long. Her quiet is too deep. It's not natural." One morning, Zawadi found dried chicken feathers and charcoal dust left at the foot of her bed. When she picked them up to clean, her sister-in-law clapped her hands dramatically. "You see? That's her magic, she doesn't even flinch." Zawadi kept her expression still, but her hands trembled as she burned the feathers outside. She tried still to be gentle, to bring tea, to offer help. But nothing softened the suspicion in Mama Asha's gaze. It was as if Zawadi had stolen something sacred, and now no amount of kindness could return it. The worst part wasn't the gossip or the stares, it was Tendo's quiet. He didn't defend her. Not once. When Mama Asha asked him why Zawadi always wore white, he only shrugged. When his sisters laughed about her witchy silences, he walked away instead of staying to correct them. At first, Zawadi told herself he was protecting her through peace. But one night, after another quiet dinner, she sat by the cooking fire and asked, "If I were your mother's daughter, would you still be this quiet?" He sighed. "Zawadi, must everything be a fight? You want me to choose between you and my family?" "No," she said calmly. "I want you to choose me with your family. I want you to say I belong." He looked away. "You already do." "No," she replied, folding her hands. "I live here. But I do not belong." He had no answer. Zawadi stopped going to the well with the other women. She stopped sitting in the main hut when guests arrived. Her world became smaller, measured by the path between the kitchen and her sleeping mat. When her childhood friend, Shirku, came to visit from another village, she saw the weight in Zawadi's shoulders. "They say you bewitched him," Shirku said softly. "But I know the truth. You're just quiet. And strength in silence scares weak people." Zawadi managed to smile. "It's tiring to live in a house where love doesn't echo." Shirku touched her hand. "Then build your own echo." The word stayed with her that night. Mama Asha's rumors spread further now, into church pews, into market stalls. Zawadi began to notice women moving away from her. A child refused the sweet she offered. The pastor's wife invited every married woman to prayer group, except her. Tendo's patience became passiveness. Then passiveness became neglect. He came home late. He sat farther. He kissed her cheek like a duty. Zawadi no longer cried. There was no space for tears in a body that had become a container of restraint. One evening, while lighting the firewood, she heard the others laughing inside the hut. Someone said, "I wonder if she cries when he's not looking." Another replied, "Even her tears are probably laced with spells." Zawadi didn't enter the house that night. She sat outside, alone, watching the flames dance. When the one you lean on becomes the wall, you learn to stand alone. It began with the pain, sharp, sudden, and spreading like fire through her lower back. Zawadi knew something was wrong. She was only 7 months along, but her body had been warning her for days. She told Mama Asha in the morning that her belly felt tight, that her legs trembled when she stood. Mama Asha only waved her off. First-time mothers always complain. If you feared pain, you should have stayed in your father's house. By nightfall, Zawadi was on the floor, curled in a ball of agony, the clay beneath her soaked with sweat. Tendo wasn't home. He had gone to visit a friend in the next village. Zawadi begged Mama Asha to call the healer. Her voice was hoarse, her body shivering. But Mama Asha folded her arms and looked at the young woman writhing at her feet. "It's too late to disturb the healer. You'll be fine. Just breathe. Women have given birth in fields before. You're not special." The pain deepened. Hours passed. Zawadi fainted once. When she woke, she was bleeding. When Tendo finally arrived just before dawn, he found her half-conscious, whispering prayers she barely remembered. He rushed for help, but it was too late. The healer arrived with soft feet and solemn hands, and gently placed the lifeless bundle into a woven cloth. Zawadi didn't scream. She didn't even speak. She just stared ahead at nothing as the dawn broke. They buried the baby quickly, no ceremony, no songs. Just a shallow grave beneath a fig tree behind the goat pen. A few women came to lay leaves. No one wept. Mama Asha's voice, always so full of judgment, was unusually quiet that day. But her silence carried no comfort. It was the silence of someone who felt no loss. Tendo sat by the grave for a few minutes, then returned to work. He didn't speak to his mother. But he didn't confront her either. Zawadi sat inside her hut for 3 days. No one brought her food. No one checked on her. She survived on rainwater and silence. On the 4th morning she emerged, thin, pale, and walking as though the ground itself no longer belonged to her. She walked to the mango tree at the edge of the compound and sat beneath it. That had been her dreaming place. When she first arrived, she used to sit there in the evenings, imagining the family she would raise. She pictured herself holding a daughter, cooking with a son wrapped around her leg, Tendo smiling in the background. She imagined laughter, music, mangoes falling to the ground in bursts of golden sweetness. Now she sat in the same spot, watching ants carry crumbs in perfect lines, listening to birds she no longer had the strength to name. She didn't cry. Not even once. Tendo passed her often, carrying water, fixing the roof, adjusting the fence. Sometimes he stopped and looked at her as if trying to say something. But he never did. Once he brought her a sweet potato roasted just the way she liked. She took it, nodded, and placed it beside her. She didn't eat it. He left it there for 3 days. On the 4th it was gone, carried off by a dog or the wind. The compound moved on. Meals were cooked. Jokes were shared. Mama Asha told visitors Zawadi had been too fragile to carry a child. Her blood is thin, she said once. I always said she wasn't strong enough. Zawadi heard it all. She said nothing. The mango tree's roots were growing through the soil like slow-moving veins. Some afternoons, she traced them with her finger, wondering how something could grow so silently and still be so strong. One day, a cousin from Tendo's side came visiting with his wife, who was pregnant. Everyone gathered to offer blessings. Songs were sung, ululations echoed across the fields. No one looked at Zawadi. She stood from her place under the tree and walked slowly to the outer circle of the gathering. The only chair left was behind the kitchen, next to the coal basket. She sat there, folding her hands in her lap, her shadow just barely touching the edge of the crowd. The new mother laughed and spoke of baby names. Zawadi stared at the soil. Later that evening, the same chair remained empty. Zawadi stood and returned to the mango tree. It became her rhythm. Morning prayers. Quiet meals. Sitting in the same place where no one had to make room for her. A young girl once came to sit beside her. Mama says you're not really part of the family, she whispered. Zawadi looked down at the child's innocent eyes and only replied, then maybe the family is smaller than it should be. That night, she sat alone again and for the first time, touched her flat belly and whispered to the child she lost. I didn't lose a child. I lost the home I thought I could build for one. Zawadi woke earlier now. Not for the family, not for the ones who walked past her without words, but for herself. Before the sun fully broke the sky, she was already at the stream, kneeling, scooping water into her calabash with movements slow but sure. Her fingers were cracked from the lye, her palms still tender from the healing herbs she gathered in secret behind the cassava field. But she didn't flinch. At home, she boiled oils, stirred crushed neem leaves, lemon rind, and scented bark in the old iron pot. The scent calmed her even when nothing else did. When the soap thickened, she poured it into molds, half coconut shells, and laid them neatly on the windowsill to dry. She called her little stall Mikono Yengu, which meant my hands. It wasn't for anyone else to understand. Only her. At the market, she spread her wares on a mat, laying the soaps beside simple notes. Good for the skin. Better for dignity. The village women noticed. Some ignored her, out of loyalty to Mama Asha or perhaps discomfort. Others approached carefully, buying in silence but returning the next week with friends. Your soap softened my child's rashes. It smells like calm. I used it for prayer day, it felt like I was washing off worry. Zawadi smiled gently and said thank you. That was enough. But when Mama Asha found out, she laughed loudly from the front porch. You think you can clean yourself into respect? Even the devil can smell good if you soak him long enough. Tendo said nothing. Just adjusted his sandals and left for town, muttering something about a business meeting. He came home late now, often after dark, sometimes without explanation. His clothes smelled of perfume she didn't wear. He no longer kissed her cheek, no longer reached for her hand in the quiet moments between sleep and sunrise. Zawadi stopped asking where he went. She had learned. Silence preserved her from further bruising. One evening, as she stirred a new batch of eucalyptus soap, Tendo walked past her on the veranda without so much as a glance. She looked at the mixture, watched the thick green swirls spin like a slow storm, and whispered, "Even when your hands bleed to build peace, some still call them dirty." She didn't expect thanks anymore. She had made peace with being unrecognized, but she would not let herself be useless. Mrembo, her one remaining friend from before the marriage, came to the market one Thursday and picked up a bar. "You're doing something with your own hands," she said. "That's more than most people do with their whole voice." Zawadi nodded. "I don't need their seats anymore. Just a little space on the ground in the sun." But it hurt sometimes, even with the piece she had carved. It hurt when Mama Asha would loudly tell neighbors, "No real wife spends her days in the market. Real women make homes, not lotions." It hurt when Tendo would bring guests and ask Wima, the visiting cousin's wife, to cook while Zawadi scrubbed pots alone. One afternoon, as she returned from the stream, arms heavy with herbs and molds, she found a note pinned to the door. "Please make yourself scarce tonight. Tendo is entertaining." No name. No greeting. Just cold ink and finality. Zawadi looked at it, folded it once, then twice, then burned it in the cooking fire. She didn't cry. She walked to the mango tree again and sat with her basket. A small girl approached, one who had bought soap before, and asked softly, "Did you make this with your own hands?" Zawadi smiled. "Yes." "They smell like your smile," the girl said, and ran off giggling. Zawadi sat there, holding a bar of her own soap, watching the village life unfold. She wondered how many more nights she'd have to pretend that survival felt like living. But she also knew something now, something strong and stubborn growing like roots in her. They could mock her. They could walk past her like she was air. But they would not break her hands. Because her hands were building something no insult could erase. On the morning of their 4th anniversary, Zawadi woke before the rooster called. The sky was still heavy with the last breath of night. In the kitchen she lit a low fire, not for tea or food, but to chase the chill sitting inside her bones. She looked around the hut, at the same clay walls, the worn calabash in the corner, the folded mats where no one had sat with her for months. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Instead, she took a piece of old parchment from the corner of her basket, unfolded it, and began to write. The words came slowly like a tap finally turned. She wrote in Swahili, in English, in silence. Whatever language her soul knew best. "Dear me. Happy anniversary. I don't know if congratulations are in order. Maybe endurance deserves applause. Maybe not." She paused, tapping the pen against her knee. "You came here with dreams. You called him your partner. Your breath. Your firewood for the long night. But look at you now, eating alone, praying alone, being ignored in your own home. You've turned into a shadow with a spine too soft to scream." She pressed the pen harder now. "They said time would heal. But time became a hallway with no doors, only echoes. He says little. His mother says too much. And you say nothing at all. You survive with soap and silence. And still they call you weak." Zawadi blinked, stared at the ink spreading like vines across the paper. "But you are not weak. You are exhausted. You are exhausted from being the only one reaching. From asking your eyes to shine when no one is looking into them. From whispering, 'I am still here,' to a man who treats your presence like background noise. And the baby. Oh, the baby. You named her Amani in your heart. But even that name never had a chance to be whispered out loud. They buried her behind the goats, like a mistake they didn't want to speak of again." Zawadi stopped writing. She wiped her cheek, she hadn't noticed the tear fall. "I want to leave. I say it now with no shame. Not because I hate him. But because I no longer recognize the woman I see each morning. She doesn't sing anymore. She doesn't write poetry in the steam of the tea kettle. She flinches when someone says her name too softly, afraid it will turn into an insult. I want her back. I miss me. So if he finds this letter, good. Let him read the pain I no longer have the voice to speak. Let him sit with it like I have sat with his silence." Zawadi folded the paper in half and set it on the small mat beside her bed, open, unhidden. She didn't tuck it under a pillow or lock it away in a basket. She wanted it seen. That day she went to the stream, sold soap, spoke kindly to a few familiar faces, and returned home without hurry. She didn't look for signs that the letter had been touched. She didn't mention it. She just prepared her own food, bathed, and went to sleep without waiting for the door to creak open. He came home after midnight. She heard him. Heard the way his steps slowed as he entered. Heard the pause, longer than usual, near her mat. Heard the quiet, deliberate sound of paper being picked up. He didn't speak. The next morning the sun filtered in as usual, warm and steady. Zawadi rose with it, stretched her legs and looked down. On the edge of her mat sat a single white hibiscus flower. She stared at it for a long time. It was fresh. Picked early, likely just before sunrise. Still moist at the base. But Tendo was gone. Not gone to the stream. Not gone to the market. Gone. His sandals were missing. So was his satchel. The little stool he always left by the door was tipped over slightly, as if he'd left in a rush, or maybe after too much thinking. She didn't ask anyone where he went. She didn't send a cousin to check the next village. She didn't even mention it to Mama Asha, who that morning pretended not to notice the absence at the breakfast fire. Zawadi just picked up the flower, held it gently, and set it in a calabash of water. Later, while sweeping the compound, she saw Mama Asha watching her. "You left your shame on the mat," Mama Asha sneered. Zawadi didn't stop sweeping. "No. Just a mirror." Mama Asha's lips tightened. Zawadi moved to her soap-making table, her hands steady. That evening she sat under the mango tree again. But this time she wasn't thinking about what had died. She was thinking about what had survived. Herself. If I have to write pain for it to be seen, perhaps it was never love, only silence in disguise. The morning Zawadi left, the sky hadn't yet turned blue. It was the color of smoke, silent and heavy. She wore a faded blue kitenge, wrapped her soaps in banana leaves, and placed her few belongings, 2 dresses, a prayer cloth and a single pair of earrings, into a cloth bag. She left the flower Tendo had given her in the calabash on the mat, wilted now but untouched. There was no farewell. No dramatic shouting. Just the quiet sound of her footsteps on the path that led away from the house, through the edge of the cassava field, and into the road that curved like a question into the next village. She walked for hours, past the acacia trees, past women drawing water, past fields where children her own might have played. Her feet blistered, but her heart beat more freely with every step. By mid-morning she arrived at her aunt's homestead in the village of Kalol. Aunt Rahima was not surprised. She simply opened her arms and held her tightly. "No one leaves unless they're already gone," she whispered. Zawadi said nothing. She didn't need to. Over the next few days she helped sweep, cooked simple meals, and rested her tired body on a woven mat that didn't carry shame or whispers. A week later, Rahima brought her to the local clinic, where a healer named Mama Lulu needed help with sorting herbs, preparing bandages and comforting sick children. Zawadi did not say much at first. But her hands remembered what they had always known: how to grind, to stir, to listen, to give without needing to be noticed. Within days Mama Lulu said, "You have healing fingers, girl. Not just for the body. For the spirit too." Zawadi smiled, and for the first time in a long while, it reached her eyes. She started rising earlier, before the birds. Not to serve people who scorned her, but to serve women who sat beside her, equal and kind. They drank tea together before work. They spoke of loss, of laughter, of what it meant to begin again. Each day, Zawadi grew back into herself. Back in her former home, Mama Asha declared victory. She held a gathering of neighbor women and said, "That one finally knew her place." Weak roots always fall in the first storm. People nodded. They didn't agree, but they nodded. She made new meals, rearranged the kitchen, sang louder at the evening fire. But inside the house the air had changed. Tendo stopped smiling. He came home from work and sat without eating. The fire crackled, but he offered no stories, no songs. Sometimes he stared at the door for long minutes. Once Mama Asha asked if he was getting sick. "No," he replied, voice low. "I'm just trying to hear the sound that used to live here." "What sound?" He didn't answer. He started forgetting things. His sandals left outside in the rain. The goats unwatered. He walked past friends without greeting them. One afternoon he returned from the market and found the flower he'd given Zawadi pressed into a page of her old notebook, which she'd left behind. He picked it up, stared at it, then sat on the step until the stars came out. Neighbors noticed. "Where's your wife?" a friend asked one evening. "She left," he said. "And you let her?" He had no reply. One evening Mama Asha placed food before him, steaming and spiced. "You won't find peace by moping, Tendo. She's not the first woman to leave. Get up. Marry again." Tendo looked at his mother, eyes dull. "Ma, I can't even remember what her voice sounded like when she was happy." He stood and walked out into the night. Meanwhile, in Kalol, Zawadi helped a young girl deliver her first child. She whispered strength into the girl's ear as the baby crowned, her hands firm, steady. When the cry came clear and loud, Zawadi smiled and said, "You did it. You brought life forward." The girl cried, not from pain but from wonder. That night, Zawadi sat under a tree outside the clinic, watching the moon cast silver over the land. She placed her hands on her knees, hands that were once called useless, dirty, unwelcome. Now they were trusted, thanked, needed. She whispered to the wind, "Sometimes your absence is louder than any scream you ever held inside." And the wind carried her peace into the dark. Not back to the place she left, but forward where healing had finally begun. Tendo had grown thin. Not in body, his shoulders were still strong, his back straight, but in spirit. His words were few now, his thoughts many. Every evening felt longer than the last, every morning colder. It had been weeks since Zawadi left. And yet she was everywhere. In the scent of the tea that now tasted bland. In the way the clothes hung stiff on the line, untouched by her careful hands. In the silence between his mother's chatter, when his mind would drift to her quiet eyes, her fingers pressing soap into shape, the gentleness she had once laid at his feet like an offering. He had once thought she would never leave. That her silence meant safety. That love would wait for him to understand it. But now, there was only absence. And the ache of questions he no longer knew how to answer. One afternoon, when Mama Asha asked if he wanted to attend a cousin's wedding, he declined without explanation. Instead, he packed a bag, told a neighbor to watch the goats, and took the road to Kalol. He didn't tell anyone why. He only knew his feet itched toward something unfinished. When he arrived, he didn't go straight to her. Pride clung to his throat. Guilt choked the rest. Instead, he walked the edges of the village, listening. Asking in small ways, buying tea near the clinic, greeting women at the market, offering coin to an elder for directions. "She helps at the women's clinic," one girl said. "Teaches girls too. So, even how to read." Tendo stood under a tree that afternoon, just outside the clearing behind the clinic. He watched from a distance as a small group of girls sat cross-legged in a circle. Zawadi knelt in the center, her kaitenj tied high, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her voice carried softly. "Not too much eucalyptus, it burns if you're careless. But just enough makes the oil wake you up." The girls giggled. She smiled fully, freely. The kind of smile he hadn't seen in over a year. She passed a shell full of the mixture, letting each girl sniff it. One clapped. Another sneezed. Zawadi laughed gently, her braids dancing with the wind. Tendo stepped forward, slowly. The girls noticed first. They quieted. Zawadi looked up, and her face stilled, not with fear or love but with a pause. Like a door creaking open to see who knocks. He lowered his head slightly. "Can we talk?" She nodded once, gesturing for the girls to finish up. They drifted away, whispering. Tendo waited until it was just them, the wind and the soft scent of lemon oil. "I came a few times," he began. Watched from the edge. Couldn't speak. Zawadi looked down, hands still working the mixture. "I didn't know how to stand in front of you, not after the way I stood behind you for so long." She didn't reply. He continued. "When I watched you today, teaching, laughing, I realized something." She looked at him now fully. Not coldly. Not warmly. Just present. "I saw you everywhere in our home," he said slowly. "In the soap. The garden. The prayers. But I never saw what you were carrying." He stepped closer, voice low. "You carried all of us, didn't you?" She folded the cloth over the bowl of mixture. "Until it crushed me." He nodded. They stood in silence, the old ache stretching between them. "I read your letter," he said. "I know. I thought the flour would be enough." She shook her head. "You always gave less than you took, Tendo. Even your apology came without words." "I don't have many left." "That's fine," she said. "I have enough for myself now." He looked at her hands, no longer cracked, no longer trembling. Strong. Certain. "I didn't just lose you," he whispered. "I lost the map. And now I'm following your footsteps too late." She studied him. "You were never asked to chase me," she said. "Only to walk beside me." The wind picked up, rustling the nearby neem tree. He didn't ask her to return. He knew better. And she didn't offer to come back. She knew herself better. As he turned to leave, she called after him softly. "Tendo." He stopped. "Tell your mother," she said, "that soap doesn't make you clean. But shame can." He smiled faintly, broken but honest. Then he walked away. Not quickly, but without turning back. And Zawadi? She returned to her girls. Because some men don't lose their wives. They lose the map. And then follow the footsteps too late. Mama Asha's illness came not like a storm, but like a slow rot, creeping into her joints, stealing her energy one complaint at a time. At first she brushed it off as tiredness. Then, as her legs stiffened and her breath grew shallow, she called out for her daughters-in-law. No one came. The house, once alive with orders and bustling footsteps, sat in an eerie quiet. The clay walls seemed to listen but not respond. The large cooking stones cooled faster than usual. Even the chickens roamed farther from the compound, as if sensing something missing. Mama Asha called again, louder this time, her voice a brittle echo, Zaituni, Rahima, anyone. But her other sons' wives, whom she had once praised as obedient, and from proper clans, did not come to her mat. One claimed she was needed at her own mother's house. Another said her children were sick. None offered soup or hot water or the comfort of sitting by her feet. Tendo sat outside under the mango tree, the one Zawadi used to sweep around every morning while humming. Now, dried leaves scattered across the dusty ground, the tree shedding silently, unnoticed. He stirred the porridge absent-mindedly. Mama Asha groaned from inside, coughing into her shawl. Still the other women did not come. By the third day whispers grew. Neighbors noticed. She fed her pride for years, one woman muttered at the well. Now even pride won't fetch her water. Another said, the only one who knew how to carry her name left walking, and left it clean. Word spread quickly. In a village where reputation was as fragile as glass, silence from a sickbed spoke louder than gossip. The women who once nodded at Mama Asha in admiration now passed the gate without greeting. Tendo remained quiet. He sat on the stool where his father used to sit, staring at the doorway. He hadn't eaten much since returning from Kalol. He couldn't taste the food he cooked. He didn't know when he last laughed. Zawadi's presence had been like steam rising from a pot, soft, invisible, but carrying warmth into every corner of the home. Now without her the house was just a structure, walls without spirit. That evening Tendo opened the trunk in the corner. Zawadi's old prayer cloth was still there, neatly folded. He lifted it gently, holding it to his face. It still carried the scent of crushed herbs and lavender. Of peace. He remembered how she used to sit by Mama Asha's bed at night, even when scolded during the day. How she made soup with garlic and honey when coughs echoed through the walls. How she scrubbed the compound not for praise, but to create dignity for the name she had married into. He remembered how his mother dismissed it all. Now Mama Asha lay curled on her mat, mumbling through a fever. She bewitched you, she made you soft. Tendo didn't respond. Instead, he lit a small lamp and sat by her feet. A neighbor knocked, peeked in and said without entering, "No one came?" He shook his head. She pursed her lips. "A shame really. Not because she's sick, but because the only one who had the grace to care was pushed out." That night, the compound was as quiet as a graveyard. Tendo couldn't sleep. He sat by the kitchen fire, watching the flames die slowly. Spoken reflection drifted through his mind like smoke. The shame of a house is not when someone leaves, but when no one ever cared why. He stood up, walked to the door and looked out into the darkness. The wind rustled through the banana leaves. He whispered into the night, unsure if the trees, the wind, or perhaps Zawadi herself might hear. "I should have asked you to stay. I should have asked what broke." But he hadn't. And now, the silence left behind told him everything he had refused to listen to before. The day Tendo returned to Kalol, the sky was wide and clear, almost painfully blue. The wind was gentle, moving the trees like they were bowing to something greater. Maybe it was apology. Maybe it was realization. He walked slower this time, not like a man on a mission but like one searching for forgiveness he might not find. Zawadi was seated beneath the same neem tree where he had seen her before, surrounded by young girls sitting in a crescent. She was teaching them how to shape soap into tiny balls, each infused with rosemary oil. The girls giggled as they rolled the mixture in their palms, proud of their craft. She looked radiant, not dressed in extravagance but in peace. Her eyes, once dim with restraint, now held the kind of light that only grows in places where it is nurtured. Places she had built herself. Tendo didn't interrupt. He sat at a distance beside a low stone and waited. Zawadi noticed him but she didn't flinch. She continued her lesson, her voice steady. "Let the soap sit in the shade to dry. Not in the sun. Sunlight gives heat, but it can burn if you're not ready." The girls nodded. One asked if they could take some home. Zawadi smiled. "Of course. Share it with your mothers." Once they were dismissed, they ran past Tendo without a word, some barefoot, some with dust between their toes, each clutching their small wrapped soaps like treasures. Zawadi wiped her hands with a cloth and turned toward him. You came back. Tendo nodded. I don't have a reason. Not this time. No excuses. She sat down opposite him. They didn't touch. They didn't reach. But something in the air settled. I've been thinking, he said quietly, about all the times I asked you to wait, to be patient, to understand. But I never gave you more than silence in return. Zawadi didn't blink. I let them insult you. I let my mother shame you. And instead of standing beside you, I kept asking you to survive. But I never helped you live. His voice cracked slightly and he looked down at the red earth between them. Zawadi didn't answer right away. She reached for a sprig of mint and crushed it between her fingers. The scent rose gently, clean and bold. You loved me like a guest, she said finally. Polite. Temporary. Someone to treat well as long as I didn't stay too long in one place. I needed to be family. Not just tolerated, woven into the walls. Tendo swallowed hard. I thought I had time to figure it out. She shook her head softly. Some truths are simple. You either protect the person you love, or you let them be wounded in your silence. A bird chirped nearby, then flew off into the late afternoon sun. I never even knew how much you carried, he said. The market. The food. The smiles. The prayers. Zawadi looked toward the clinic. I carried all of it because I thought that's what love looked like. Giving. 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 But love isn't just what you carry. It's also who helps you lift it. Tendo looked up at her, eyes full of regret. And now? She stood slowly, brushing dust from her wrapper. Now I carry different things. Healing. Lessons. My name. She began walking toward the shade where her soaps were drying and then paused. You came here hoping for something. Maybe a word. A sign. Maybe hope. Tendo stood too, unsure if he should follow. Zawadi turned slightly, her expression not cold, but firm. I waited for a home, Tendo. I waited in your house, your arms, your silences. But it was never built, not for me. So I built my own. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. And that hurt more than anything. Because he realized then, Zawadi no longer needed him to understand. She had already understood herself. She walked away, not in anger but in peace. And Tendo stood in that place where love once was, realizing that when you fail to make someone feel they belong, you don't just lose them. You lose the version of yourself that could have been better. The home I waited for was never built. So I built my own. 1 year later, the land behind the Kalol clinic had transformed. Where once dry soil cracked in silence, neat rows of herbs now swayed in the breeze, lemon balm, basil, aloe, marigold. The building beside it bore a hand-carved wooden sign. Mikono Yetu, our hands. It wasn't just a name. It was a belief. That healing, building, rising, it all began in the hands of women. Not soft hands but strong ones. Scarred, calloused, steady. Zawadi stood at the center of it all, greeting new faces every morning. Some were young girls escaping early marriage. Some were widows, heads bent with stories too heavy for one lifetime. Others were simply women like she had once been, ignored, unloved but not undone. She taught them soap making, natural medicine, how to package oil with care, and how to sign their names with pride. And on most days, though always from a respectful distance, Tendo came too. He didn't carry a title. He didn't seek her hand again. He came in a simple cotton shirt, a notebook in his pocket and quiet in his eyes. He helped fix broken taps. He carried buckets. He cleaned workstations. Sometimes he swept. The women noticed. Some scoffed at first. Isn't that the one who? Zawadi never told them what to think. But she never pushed him away either. One warm afternoon, after a soap wrapping session beneath the neem tree, a curious girl named Imani tugged at Zawadi's skirt. Teacher Zawadi, she asked, why did you let him follow you? After everything? The question wasn't cruel. Just bold. Zawadi looked at Tendo from afar, where he was helping a limping elder stack herbal jars into crates. Then she knelt so she was eye level with the girl and said, because I didn't walk away in anger. I walked away in truth. And truth doesn't fear being followed, it just refuses to be doubted. Imani blinked as if storing the words for later. That evening, as the women cleared up and the sun painted orange across the walls, Tendo approached. He didn't speak right away. He handed Zawadi a tin of dried lavender, freshly crushed, and said, the girls said it helps them sleep. She took it gently. It does. A long pause passed between them. I don't expect anything, he said quietly. I know, she replied. But thank you, for letting me show up. Zawadi gave him the briefest smile. Everyone's allowed to plant something new. Just don't expect flowers where you left ashes. He nodded. I water the ground now. Even if it's not mine. Zawadi turned to leave, calling gently for the younger girls to gather their things. As they followed her, trailing behind like a stream of bright cloth and giggles, Tendo watched her walk. And he understood something deeper than regret. She hadn't become someone new. She had simply become everything she was never allowed to be. People came from other villages now, asking about Mikono Yetu, requesting Zawadi to speak at their women's gatherings, wanting to replicate her model of healing and dignity. She shared freely, never holding bitterness in her palms. She no longer wore the necklace Mama Asha had once mocked. Instead, she wore a strand of beads made by the girls themselves, each color representing a lesson: strength, forgiveness, silence, boundaries, renewal. At the end of every month, the women would gather under the stars. They shared food, sang songs, and told their stories, not with shame but with certainty. Zawadi always closed the night with a story of her own. Not of pain but of planting. I was the footsteps they ignored, she once said, voice soft over a flickering fire. Now those footsteps grow flowers. And indeed they did. From where she had walked out of silence, lavender now bloomed. From where she had once stood alone, barefoot and dismissed, girls now marched, barefoot yes but singing. The garden remembered. So did the village. So did Tendo. But most importantly, Zawadi remembered herself. And that was more than enough.